I'm deeply afraid for the future of the American Republic. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and I cannot help but think that we are witnessing the total disintegration of the strictures of government that has made the American Republic the greatest, most astounding nation in the entire history of the world. And it reminds me of the dying days of the Roman Republic before the Roman Civil War and the Imperial Age, and then the subsequent degeneration of Roman life that happened. Took a long time, but certainly, was never what it was during the Republic years. And why do I say that? Well, in the United States, it's not just the government structures, the separation of powers, which is also being eroded, which I'll get to. But there are other strictures that are essential to the functioning of that democracy, notably the fourth estate, the media. The media's ability to communicate to the public, to translate for a very large population in whose hands the electoral power exists to elect distant representatives in order to enact legislation and make laws and make war. They have to be able to speak freely and express themselves in a way that allows the American people to understand what's really going on. And there are two forms of censorship that is playing out right now that is destroying the American Republic. One is an external form of censorship, and that is the form of tech censorship, deciding what can and can't be displayed. Now, in a previous video, which of course we'll link to, I went into detail as to what happened to the New York Post. It was only today, weeks later, that the New York Post has been allowed to publish again on Twitter. Even though Twitter admitted fault under oath, they did not actually change their policy in a way that allowed New York Post to continue to operate. And the reason they did that, the explanation they gave under oath, and I'll come to the testimony as well, was that they changed their policy, but because New York Post didn't delete the tweet under the old policy, which they changed and admitted was wrong, they had continued to freeze the account. That was their absurd justification for essentially purging the fourth largest circulation in the United States, a paper 220 years old founded by Alexander Hamilton himself. And yet, the power that these tech giants assume for themselves to decide what the elected people can and can't see, or what elected representatives can and can't say and have expressed to the public, or what media outlets can and can't investigate, is just beyond the pale. Nobody willingly gave tech giants this power, and they're exercising it in the most illegitimate manner possible. And to that end, the Twitter of Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey testified recently before the Senate, and he was asked a question. He looked like an absolute homeless person, by the way. He's living in another world. That's an aside. He was asked a question: does Twitter have the power to influence American elections? And Jack Dorsey, almost with a straight face, but not quite, said no. That is more egregious a lie, more obviously, self-evidently false on its face, than when the tobacco companies famously testified before Congress that cigarette smoking is not addictive. Okay? Like, Twitter is the single largest breaking news broadcasting platform in the world. Nobody can get their message out, if they're a journalist or a politician or a major media outlet, without a Twitter presence. And Twitter blocking your account means that you are going to be 24, 48, 72 hours behind everybody else in terms of being able to disseminate information broadly on social media, because that is the way in which people communicate breaking news, right? The suppression manipulation of Twitter algorithms to make sure certain things are trending, so it will show up in your timeline, and the suppression of others, even without direct banning, manipulates the public in what they do and do not see. These are supposed to be carrier platforms, and yet they're exercising power that is reprehensibly a direct assault on everything about the foundational American document and the First Amendment of freedom of expression and association, right? It is undermining democracy in a way that adversaries of the United States, all of the allegations of Russia, and China and the rest could only dream of. It is unreal. It is unreal and a real danger to the future of the American society. The other form of censorship is self-censorship. The fear that you will be cancelled. The fear that if you say the wrong thing, you will get banned by these tech giants, that you rely upon subscription services and models. You rely on a readership devoted to a certain way of thinking. The self-selection, the self-censorship of information to ensure that you subscribers do not get upset is a real danger to the business model. Because once upon a time, as I said before, media outlets got their money from advertising. So they competed with one another on journalistic prestige. Who could get the right stories? Who could dig deeper into investigative journalism and really reveal important things that the American people need to know? Well, now you get popular by having your stories go viral. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you don't get shadow banned by tech giants. And two, to make sure that your headlines are as rage baity as possible in order to either get people to in anger share them or in kind of, cheerleading share them. And either way, you end up developing a readership base that will continue to support you because they agree with that particular point of view that you're pushing. And therefore, the only way for you to make revenue is to get subscribers from that and to replay back to them things that they already have biases for, right? It's not to bring things to the public attention that they need to know that are impacting their democracy. So the media is completely absent, either through tech giants manipulating the elections or from media outlets themselves self-censoring to prevent the loss of revenue. Now, Twitter only unlocked New York Post's account, it should be said, not because they were exposed as complete liars under oath on Senate testimony, and not because even the story is clearly disseminated worldwide despite their best efforts to suppress it. They only did it because their share price plummeted 20-25%, right? Because people were afraid about the regulation and breakup of these major tech giants and the backlash the Republicans were having against them, simply because of their totally illegitimate use of unelected power to manipulate voters in the election. And then the worst thing about all of this is that people aren't stupid, and this will lead to massive instability in the American Republic. Why? Because people who feel that the election has been stolen, either because of tech giant manipulation or media like lies and censorship, and there's another issue I'll come to as well, or deep state actors have prevented key information from getting out to the public. Well, they're going to think that the results of the election, with some justification, were illegitimate. The American people were deceived into voting things based on lies because they don't have direct access to the politicians. They rely on these intermediaries, either through carrier platforms, speaking to them, i.e. Twitter, where Trump tweets out and things like that, or media outlets interpreting for the public the events that are happening that are of public interest. If all of those things are conspired to manipulate in an overt way, not just present a certain ideological slant, which has always been the case, but in an overt way deny basic facts and avoid the publication of critical information, then the American people are rightly going to lose faith in those institutions and perhaps even seek through various means, and not all of them peaceful, to overturn them. And we're seeing this right now with one particular massive story that is not being reported on at all. The FBI have opened an investigation into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden for money laundering, right? That is not being, that's not a myth. That's not fake news. That's something that the FBI have declared because they know that the Leiden laptop is real, that the contents on it are real. They've got a whistleblower who's come out and spoken on the record in his own name, testifying that it's all real. And yet the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, CNN, MSNBC, these major outlets have not even covered it at all. This massive story. Why? Because they don't want Joe Biden's election prospects to be impacted, and they want Donald Trump to lose. If you go on Twitter right now, I guarantee you, if you look on anything politics Twitter, it'll be trending something negative about Trump, right? Simply because, irrespective of whether it's true, irrespective of whether it's verified, but because of the media bias. Now, that is a problem, even if you're a Biden supporter, okay? It is incredibly short-sighted to think that the media tech giants, the media outlets themselves, and the so-called deep state is doing this with your interests in mind as a Biden voter. They're doing it with their own interests in mind, and their interests, I assure you, as an average American, are not aligned. And in the future, they're not just going to give up that power willingly that they have gotten used to using. It'll be habituated. It'll be normalized. You will live in a state in which you cannot trust the media, in which you cannot trust the communications not being manipulated. You cannot trust algorithms not shadow banning you. You cannot trust that one day you'll simply be cancelled because you didn't go along with what the tech giants decided. These are all things that are the products of a totalitarian state. And if it sounds hyperbole, what I'm talking about, nothing I'm talking about is anything that isn't happening right now. Like, these are real things that are happening in the world. And so we need to be guard against that. And if we actually genuinely believe that the Chinese model of total control, total surveillance, social credit is a dystopian thing that we want to avoid as a free-loving people, well, we actually have to stand up for those Western values that protect those things. If we don't do that, then these silent yielding to ever-growing, external censorship and control is something that we are willingly surrendering to, and we do that at our own peril. So-called deep state stuff. When I use that term, it has been, it is a political term that it's used primarily by Trump voters to talk about, the elites and so on. When I talk about it, I talk about it in the context of American security apparatus. So the NSA, the CIA, the Foreign Intelligence Services, who exist to engage in interference and engage in espionage and manipulation and sabotage with foreign adversaries. That's what they're there for. They're there to deal with America's enemies. And yet these enormous powers, these enormous unaccountable secret controls have been turned on the American people. And I would really encourage people to follow Glenn Greenwald, who was the person who interviewed Edward Snowden. Now, I'm not a supporter of Edward Snowden, by the way, but I am a supporter of Glenn Greenwald, who was the one who interviewed him. He has enormous integrity. He founded The Intercept and has just quit The Intercept, the very organization he founded, in protest of censorship. And he's a leftist. He's not someone who's, out there shilling for the Republicans, but he is totally against this unaccountable power, which was a leftist position, that we need to avoid monopolies, avoid tech giants having total control of our lives, and to make sure that we maintain independent freedom of speech and association. Why? Because every progressive idea, every leftist idea started out as a minority viewpoint and only became a majority viewpoint by having debate, competing with bad ideas and winning out those arguments. And if we are no longer able to do that, if everything we see here is filtered through those that have an agenda, and are unable to assume that power ourselves, and to not even know things that the tech giants don't want us to know, then we aren't living in a free society by definition. So I really urge people to go away and have a look at Jack Dorsey's testimony that he gave. It is the most terrifying thing that I've ever heard. I'll certainly leave a link in the description. Hats off to those senators who really grilled him, particularly Ted Cruz. I thought that was a magnificent line of questioning. He asked a very obvious question. He said, and I'll finish on this, I promise. He said, does Twitter have the power to influence elections? Jack Dorsey says no. And Ted Cruz couldn't believe what he heard. And he followed up with, well, why ban anything at all? if it has no influence, why ban anything? To which Twitter's answer was very fascinating, and I'll leave you the opportunity to see that for yourself. Please have your comments down below. Happy to engage with them. This is the most important issue in Western culture today, and so I will certainly cover it again, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.